Hello, plant people. How are you guys doing? If you didn't guess from the title, it's about the video I made on Monday about no-dig gardens, and in particular, the Charles Dowding theory. How it works, negatives, positives, all that fun stuff. And with that, I stumbled on some folks that are very passionate about the no-dig garden. And let me tell you, I will apologize. I was wrong on one part of my video, and that was how to pronounce his name. Other than that, I'm not apologizing. And because there was an enormous amount of name calling, most of which YouTube did catch, block, and delete, I was called so many different names. And so I'm actually going to bring out the science, and not just the science. I brought out the whiteboard for this video, and I'm bringing out the math to explain why I think there's a massive overuse of compost and manure, what can happen, and how much excess there is. Now, can you still use a no-dig garden and just apply manure and compost? Absolutely. Go ahead. I don't care. I'm only giving you the tools to determine what works best for you. So if you're ever wondering how much manure or compost you need to apply that's both economical and environmentally friendly, because eutrophication is happening in a no-dig garden that is pure compost and manure, I'm sorry, it's just a fact. We'll get into why. But if you want to apply it at a reasonable rate, then this video is for you. Also, for those of you that had the very good question of, I love the no-dig method, which I love the no-dig method too. I think it's brilliant. I think it's got its definite merits. That's why I introduced it and decided to talk about it on the channel, because I do think it's very helpful to a ton of people. But there is a way to do it where it's not necessarily pure manure or compost. And Charles Dowding also says this. He even mentions that you do not have to do straight manure or compost. You can use soil aggregates.
It does not necessarily mean you need loads of compost.
So I'm going to help you determine how much of that overall soil profile you can make into an inorganic platform that's not compost or manure. Now, the only reason why I brought up the eutrophication and the over-application of compost or manure wasn't surprisingly, the purpose wasn't to get as much hate as I ended up receiving. It was because in my profession, if you were to, and anyone who's an agronomist could actually comment this down below, I'm not sure if I have any that follow me, but there's something called a professionalisms certificate, and it's a designation that you get based on your education, experience, and what you're recommending to people in the field as your job. If you do not uphold laws or rules, or you give the wrong recommendations, you can actually have this professionalism certificate revoked based on you're not using efficacy in the industry. And manures in particular, not so much compost because it's not a large scale additive for the most part, but manures in particular have a huge advocacy behind them because of eutrophication and the issues with it. There are a lot of laws in a lot of different countries that apply to farmers in particular that are using manures. If you over apply, you can be fined. Bottom line. So if I was to give a recommendation of a no-dig garden and say pile on a foot the first year and then pile on 2 inches, an inch, 3 inches every year after that, there's a likelihood that especially if I recommended it on a large scale, I would lose my professionalism certificate. It would be gone and I wouldn't be able to function as an agronomist any longer. So because I'm kind of bound by law to tell you the truth, let's just go through the math and how I would calculate this for a farmer on a larger scale, but let's narrow it down. Let's talk about this on a garden scale. Per square foot, how much has to be added? One thing I will say before we jump into the actual math of this entire thing is I want to say thank you to Bruce. He pointed out something that should be pretty obvious about my channel, but it's a science channel and the scientific method is to question everything. That's how we get better at what we're doing. So I will never say anything's perfect. If I review a product, if I review a way of doing things, I'm always going to have something negative to say. And that's because that's my background and that's what I'm designed to do. So while there's positives and while I'll say, this is great, I think you should try this, this is an opportunity for everyone involved, you're still going to have a but. That's just the way it's going to work. I, with my own garden, my own plants, have a lot of buts and where I think I went wrong and what could be better and all that stuff. So there's never a perfect design. I think the only way to get away from all negatives of anything for food is essentially foraging. But even foraging is going to have its downfalls. So this is a science channel. So if you don't want thought-provoking content, if you don't want something that's going to challenge your belief system anyway, the channel's probably not for you. But if you want challenging thoughts and you want to look at something with an analytical mind and be able to kind of sort through the information you're getting to determine what will and what won't work for you, then this channel is for you. So Wild Edibles made a great comment on the last video as well, where they said how they have a no-dig garden, but they don't do straight compost or manure either. They do a huge array of things, and it's not necessarily a no-dig entirely. There is some digging portions to their garden as well. They brought up that aspect of it too. So this isn't nothing on this channel is going to be hard and fast. This is science. Everything's very open to interpretation, and there's just a lot of different ways of looking at it. So let's jump into exactly how a soil scientist or an agronomist would look at this for a farmer, but let's shrink it down into a garden size scenario. Now, what I'm going to say on the garden size scenario of this whole thing is that these values are going to appear very, very tiny. It's because I'm working on a cubic foot. And the reason I'm working on cubic footage is because I think that will then help everyone, regardless of what size garden, container gardens, all the way to flower beds, determine how much they may need of both inorganic and actual manure or compost. So that's the reason I made it so tiny. So whatever value you come up with when you run through this exercise, all you're going to do is you're going to take your length and your width of your plot or your garden and or your container, and you're going to multiply them together, and then you're going to multiply it by the value that we've determined, and that's going to give you the total number of product that you're going to need to be successful in this. And this doesn't apply to just no-dig. This applies to all gardens across the board. I'm going to do manure today. If you want me to look at compost, for example, or if you want me to run through a different type of manure, I'm going to do solid beef cattle manure because this is probably the most widely used one. So if you want me to do this with other examples, let me know. And I can do a longer style one where I just run through each and every single scenario. Or if you have a specific garden plot size that you want me to look at, then again, please let me know and I will go through that with you as well. So I did a ton of math. This is the day of that video coming out that I filmed like a week ago. Just because I thought, you know what? So I literally ran through this. I could post a photo. If you want a photo of kind of all of this, let me know. I can post a video or a photo on my Instagram so you guys can see this and exactly what I did here. But I'm going to really simplify that and kind of take out all the gibberish. I'm just going to put it on my whiteboard in a very simplified form. So we're doing generic vegetable garden. If you want to get very specific with a certain type of crop, you're going to need to figure out what your crop needs to do well. So, for example, in farming, if you were doing corn or canola, that value is going to be much higher. But in this case, we're just doing vegetables, and we're gonna plan for nitrogen because we're going to do it on the Charles Dowding concept, where we're not using any form of soil. We're using pure manure and compost, so there's no soil testing involved. And this will make sense as we go through. So number one, what we need to determine is what our crop requires. So crop requirements, in this case, we can say all vegetables have a requirement of, on average, is a 10, 10, 10. Anyone who grows vegetables is cursing me right now, but we're trying to keep this very, very simple math-wise. So we're just gonna work on a 10, 10, 10. There's nothing wrong with this value. This value will yield a yield. That's all that matters. So now we can go in, and this will tell us how many pounds. I did pounds per 1,000 square feet to start off with. So this works out to approximately 2.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. But I narrowed this down to per square foot. So that gives us an actual value of 0.0025 pounds per foot cubed, cubic foot. So that means, and people are going to curse me for this, but this is for the first year of a Charles Downing no-dig garden. We're doing a 1 foot height, so 1 foot depth, I should say, by 1 foot long by 1 foot wide. So a giant cube, basically, is what we're doing. So that is the amount of nitrogen we need for our crop. Number two, which we would calculate in if we were wanting to ensure that we are legally sound, like we're legally not over applying our manure, we would actually factor in our legume credit. It's called a legume credit. But essentially what our legume credit is it is a credit that is applied to the field due to legumes' natural ability to sequester nitrogen, because they have the affinity to be able to pull atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and into the soil through their nodules. There's actually an inoculant that you can get from that. You can get it from pretty much any store. So in a field, on a farmer's field, you would get a nitrogen credit. But we're not getting a nitrogen credit here because that's just going to complicate our math. So that brings us to number 3. So our value here is going to be a big old 0. So the next thing we want to calculate is our residual N. So this is where in the second year, the Charles Downing method, we would be calculating this, and it's staggering what the results are here for that. But when we're starting out, because we're not in contact with the soil at all, we're starting at a base of 0. So we're starting at a total base of 0. However, if we're working in our first year, or in our second year, we can actually calculate out what our residual N factor would be. Now, if you don't have a soil test, a nitrogen test, don't assume a 0, assume some sort of value. And you can use kind of the math that I'm using here because I'm being very, very conservative on my values. So I'm underestimating for you guys. The way we're going to do this is we're going to take our prior year's rate, and then we're going to multiply. So this is our prior year's application rate for our manure. Then we're going to multiply that by our nitrogen analysis for our manure. And we'll get into what that means here in a bit. And then we're going to take our historical factor. So there's a huge list of the amount of N that's in a manure online. I'll put some resources for that down below. But what we're going to do here is, because we're using solid beef, when I mean solid, I mean non-liquid form. It's a stuff you buy in the bag. So we have 11 pounds of N per 1 ton. So I have to obviously degrade this a bit because we're working on cubic square feet. So here, I actually brought it down to, what value did I give it? So this ends up converting into a 0.03475 pounds per foot cubed. So that's what that ends up being. Our historical factor is actually a set factor laid out by government and etc. and so forth. So I'm going to use a 0.25 because this is basically saying that over 8 years out of 10 manure was applied. If it's less than that in your case, and that value is less than 8 but greater than 4, so between 4 and 8 out of 10 years, then the factor is actually 0.15. And then if it's less than 4 years, it's actually, if it's less than 4, it's actually 0. So because we're talking about the Charles Dowding no dig garden and we're continually adding every year, we would use a 0.25 factor. So then our prior year's rate is obviously going to be the rate of a 5-pound bag. So I use the black cow for this example. So a 5-pound bag of manure is actually exactly equal to 1 cubic foot of soil, which is exactly going to fill 1 foot depth by 1 foot wide by 1 foot high. So for that first year, we're applying at a rate of 0. In your second year, when you're applying only a 2-inch depth, it comes out to be, this is going to look really, it's going to look really silly because I had to do it in cubic inches. So it's a 0.0057 pounds of N per 288 cubic inches, which would be the volume of a 12 by 12 by 2. So that would be the rate for the second year. This would be your rate for the first year. So let's do it based on the first year, not because I'm biased, just because we got to get a baseline. So when we put all this together, our value, our number 3 value actually gives us a 0.034375 pounds per foot cubed. So this is our residual N. This is number 3. Now what we do for step number 4 is we would typically take into consideration our nitrogen reserves, but in this instance we don't have a nitrogen reserve, we don't have a soil test to tell us what our reserve is. So we take our value from 1 and we minus it from our value from 2 and we minus it from our value from 3, and then typically we'd have a soil test on here too, but we don't have the soil test because they're starting out with cardboard. So our first value is a 0.0025 pounds per foot cubed. And this is the value our vegetables need to survive. Our next value is a 0. And then our next value is a 0.034375 pounds per foot cubed. Anyone who knows math can already see the issue here. We end up, this number 4 is our net requirements. So this is going to tell us how much nitrogen we need to grow a vegetable crop. This is the fun part. When we subtract all these values, if we had a nitrogen value in here, so if we're doing this on bare ground, this would be worse. This would look worse. But because we have that omitted, because we even have the legumes omitted, it's going to look better than what it actually could be. So it gives us a negative value, meaning we have excess nitrogen to the tune of 0.0318 0.75 pounds of N per foot cubed. If we had a plot, say that was 1,000 cubed feet, which is not abnormal for an average gardener to have, we could times this by 1,000, which would give us a 31.87 N. So that's how many pounds we would have over in our garden. That would be completely underutilized. And that's including the factor of normal sequestration and stuff that not necessarily bioavailable in the year. This is just the stuff that's bioavailable in that first year. Now, every year we're going to compound on that, meaning every year, if we just continue to grow vegetable crops, this will increase. What will also happen is if we put peas or beans, this value is actually going to shrink quite a bit. And again, this value is going to grow, especially if we're still applying. So I'm just going to delete all this stuff. And let's just start off with what would we do if we're trying to figure out, so we did all that math to figure out what our net requirements would be. Say that net requirement wasn't a negative and we're actually trying to figure out how much we had to apply for manure on the ground, which would bring us to our step 6. We would have to, again, figure out the available amount of N in our manure. In this case, it's 11 pounds per ton based on it being a solid beef. Works out to a 0.0275 pounds per foot cubed. Our total amount of N is 0.35. So our available amount of N, bioavailable amount of N is based on, again, a set factor of 0.35. This is specific to beef. So we have a 0.35. We're going to take that 0.35 and we're going to multiply it by this value here. And that's going to give us our total amount of N that's going to be available for us in that first year, which is around 0.009625 pounds per foot cubed. So in your first year, this is how much nitrogen will be available for that first year. So typically what you would do then is, in your 7th step, is you would take your net requirements, which in this case is the negative, that's going to irritate so many people, the negative 0.031875 pounds per foot cubed. And then you're also going to take your available, available N based on the type of manure you're using. Again, this fluctuates based on the type that you're using, your compost, whatever the case is. And do this with different examples if you like. 96.25 pounds per foot cubed. You're going to take these two values and you're going to find the difference between them. So this is called your balance. So you're going to do our 0.03185 pounds divide by 0.009625 pounds per foot cubed. And this is going to give us a value, negative 3.3116 pounds per foot cubed. Now, if this wasn't a negative, that would mean that you would add, out of a 5-pound bag, you would add 3 pounds of manure to every square foot of your garden. But because this is a negative value, this is telling us we should be removing 3.36 pounds of manure from our garden. So what this can tell us, what this means, is we can now determine if we're using a beef manure for our no-dig Charles Dowding garden, we could technically use 3/5 could be inorganic. So 3/5 of our mixture could be actual soil. It doesn't have to be compost or manure, and you would gain very, very similar results. Microbially, I don't think it would have a huge effect, mostly because the reason why the microbes are doing so well in the no-dig is because there's no sun, there's high moisture, and there's very little air. So anaerobic microbes, they're just going to do well in general in any no-till garden. It has nothing to do, or very little to do, with the manure and the compost specifically. There's so many factors that go into the actual soil food web. So if you're toying with the idea of a no-dig and you want to do an inorganic-organic mix, consider a 3-to-5 ratio. So for every 5 pounds of product, put 3 pounds inorganic, 2 pounds organic. If that makes any sense. So I hope this helps you. This value, if it wasn't negative, you would be adding 3 pounds of manure for every square foot. But because it's negative, it actually helped us determine what our inorganic value, exactly how much we could put in and still be safe. So it would be for every 3 pounds we could apply, for every 5 pounds we could apply 3 pounds of inorganic product. Ella's like, what are you doing in my room? It's so late at night. So I hope this helped you, and I hope for some of you it really, really triggered you and upset you just way too much, because that's literally my motivation. I want to thank you guys so much for your support on the last video. If you were watching, I appreciate those of you who are backing me up in the comment section. I truly do appreciate it. It doesn't bug me much. I was bullied quite a bit in school, so I have red hair and freckles. It just never ends well, and I'm nerdy to top it off, so whatever. Let me know in the comments below if you want more videos on application rates for things like manure or compost, or if you want me to try it with different manures and compost to give you a similar idea, or if you want me to just completely try this based on someone's soil sample that you want to send me, or like a theoretical soil sample, what I would think the average garden would have. And we can just go through exactly how much you should be putting on, what ratios you can use, all that fun stuff. If you guys enjoy those really mathy, nerdy, heavy topics, let me know. I can get into this stuff pretty deep if you need me to or you want me to. I try to keep it pretty superficial because I want to keep it open to all walks of life, from beginners to advanced. And I think I've been doing a good job of this. This may have been a more advanced video. I appreciate if you have made it this far. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you on Friday. Bye.